take your seats.
Bitte nehmen Sie Platz.
Please take your seats. The session adjourned on the 26th of November is reopened. The minutes and the text adopted on the
concerns over EU borders being extended to Iraq, Iran and Syria. So let us be clear to Turks about what that relationship is. But let us also be clear to our voters what EU countries get in return for signing a visa-free agreement and what we get in return for the €3 billion that Turkey is demanding. And let us finally get to grips with some of the basics. A thorough registration process, a proper returns and readmissions agreement with countries in exchange for our aid, and effective external border controls. Let us work together to build long-term solutions, not offer short-term promises that will never be fulfilled.
Thank you, Mr. Kamal. Mr. Kamal, there's a veritable flood of blue cards coming your way. But it'll be first come, first served. Ms. Florenza, therefore, has a question for you. Do you accept?
You talked about Turkey as an ally of the European Union since it's a NATO member. I'd like to know what you think of what the Erdogan government is doing vis-à-vis the Kurdish people. Does the European Parliament factor that in? We just heard a colleague say that we shouldn't hand a blank check to Turkey, but shouldn't be worried about the fact that we're giving money to a government that is massacring its own people.
Yes.
Das Wort hat jetzt für die.
Thank you very much. On behalf of the Liberals, Mr. Verhofstadt.
I want to continue where Mr. Kamal ended. I think cooperation with Turkey, yes. Outsourcing our problems, no. That's the fact. And let's be honest, the impression that we have is the opposite. A visa-free regime, €3 billion, speeding up the accession negotiations, for some Turkish cooperation in helping to manage
to be far more active in developing better relations with Turkey. But I really don't think that Turkey is a reliable partner to address refugee issues or on Syria. Because if you look at the domestic developments in Turkey, there are things happening that we can't ignore. Democrats will only feel shocked at what's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, I have here a list, a sort of memorial of the journalists under arrest. I'd be happy to hand it to Council and Commission, and I hope that this list is not ignored in the future. Please conclude, Mrs. Harms. Finish. Please, Mrs. Harms, don't run away. Lots of people want to ask you a question. Mr. Etheridge.
Listening to the speech, I note that you're interested in closer cooperation, but you still had great reservations about the Turkish government. Thank goodness, I'm glad you do. I was wondering, does this closer cooperation eventually, in your mind, lead to Turkish membership of the EU? And if so, do you feel the same as me, that whenever I've been to Turkey, almost everyone I speak to says they want to move to the EU? It would lead to a migration situation of an even greater problem than we've ever faced before. Do you agree that this would be a dangerous folly at the moment to even consider Turkish membership of the EU any time in our lifetime, really?
Mrs. Harms. Yes, I am in favour of the European Union to act on the basis of the treaties and to deliver what it's promised to Turkey, and that means serious and systematic negotiations with that country. I think it's good that things are being taken in hand. Now, as for the question of membership of the European Union, how and when, that is in fact pretty controversial in Turkey itself. but all parties wanted negotiations, and the European Union has to do what it promised to do in 2004. Thank you very much. Now on behalf of the EFDD, Mr. Farage.
Failures in my long years here. The introduction of a currency that's impoverished the Mediterranean. I've seen the idealised Schengen area lead to the free movement of Kalashnikovs, and every single week and month we see the attempt to create a single state of Europe, which of course the European peoples don't want. But the EU's common asylum policy is the lowest ebb for policy yet. Chancellor Merkel took the cork out of a champagne bottle and said anyone could come, and now you're trying to put the cork back in and realising it's not possible. So you've turned to somebody else to sort out your own problem. So let's talk Turkey. They have taken your weakness and they've now decided they're going to blackmail you. Not only do they want €3 billion from you this year, they're going to want €3 billion from you every single year. And in return, they've given absolutely no guarantees whatsoever that they will stop people from coming or indeed take people back. And they've managed to persuade you, whatever the Commissioner says, into offering them, by October next year, visa-free access for 75 million people whose average GDP income is half that of the poorest EU member state. I guess what you're doing is you're saying the way we'll stop illegal immigration is to make it all legal immigration. And if that doesn't take the biscuit, now you're going to fast-track Turkey to be an EU member. So let's just think about that. A country, 97% of whose landmass is in Asia, apparently you want to join Europe. It is a country that appears to be keener on bombing the Kurds than it is on taking on ISIS. It is a country that has turned a complete blind eye to ISIS fighters travelling through its territory. It is a country, according to the Pew Institute, whose poll last week showed that 8% of those 75 million actively encourage and support the aims of ISIS. It is a country directly and closely linked with buying ISIS oil, and we will finish up bordering Syria, Iraq and Iran. It is mad. It is the most dangerous decision the European Union has yet taken. I'm sure the British Prime Minister will be delighted. He's campaigned for this since 2005. To me, without any of the other debate, if there was one single reason why Britain should, in this referendum, vote to leave the European Union, it is the folly of political integration with Turkey. It is not only stupid, it is damned dangerous.
Mr. Farage, Mr. Weigel has a question to ask you.
Gospod Farage.
Mr. Farage, you were very determined when describing all the bad things you see in our relationship with Turkey. Could you name another country which in this point of time could make a more efficient contribution towards what we are trying to combat today? We're trying to get a grip of the refugee crisis. And the second question, were you just as determined when speaking at home where your country participated in destroying the countries which the refugees are now fleeing?
Believe you me, I was no supporter of Tony Blair's endless series of wars, and if I was in a different parliament and not this one, I would vote against the bombing campaign that Mr Cameron wishes to join the Americans and French in, because it has been poorly, badly thought through with no long-term strategy whatsoever. Look, if you want to deal with a problem that you've caused yourself in life, rather than relying on somebody else to do it for you, perhaps it's better to recognise and realise you've made a mistake. And the only solution open to the European Union is to follow the example of Australia, who from 2008 onwards had a lot of boats heading towards their country, a lot of boats sinking, a lot of people drowning, many of the similar symptoms and problems, and the Australians said, if you wish to become a refugee or a migrant to Australia, you will not succeed in doing so if you come via this route. And the boats stopped coming. And the EU needs to have the moral courage to stand up and say that, but frankly, they haven't got the guts.
Köszönöm, Farage úr. Következő hozzászólónk, de Graaf képviselő úr.
Thank you. The next speaker is Mr. De Graaf.
Voorzitter.
President, the European elite has genuflected before the Sultan of Ankara. Turkey's getting 3 billion euros, so 75 million Turks will be able to march into Europe at the end of 2016, and the collapse is just a question of time. The institutions want to have a new Ottoman Empire in Europe, and we're seeing mosques which will become the barracks. There'll be soldiers coming over the border and in our midst. We're seeing that Sharia will be implemented. There is no moderate Islam. How clear do you want to see these things? We have a Western culture and democracy that needs to be defended. We shouldn't allow ourselves to be cajoled, and we should never be dependent on a dictator. Close the internal borders. That is the answer to the migratory flows and the Turkish invasion. And this is why, President, we have to make sure of one thing, and that is that Turkey never becomes a member of the European Union in 100,000 years.
Következő hozzászólónk a független képviselők közben.
Thank you very much. The next speaker is Mr. Synadinos.
Öné a szó.
Madam President, I would like to counter what Mr. Weber and Mr. Verhofstadt said about Greece.